Hello everyone, this is Eva Nolik-Smith with Yoga U Online, and I'm very pleased to be here today with author and yoga therapist Carol Krucoff in North Carolina. Carol is a yoga therapist at Duke Integrative Medicine in Durham, North Carolina, where she offers individual yoga therapy sessions and classes and co-directs the Integrative Yoga for Seniors professional training. Carol is an award-winning health journalist and the author of several books on yoga, including Yoga Sparks, 108 Easy Practices for Stress Relief in a Minute or Less. It's one of my favorite titles, as well as Healing Yoga for Neck and Shoulder Pain. And I think you co-wrote a book with your husband as well, Carol, Healing Moves?
Yes, that's right. Healing Moves, How to Cure, Relieve, and Prevent Common Ailments with Exercise.
Yes. And you are also the co-director with Kimberly Carson of the Yoga for Seniors program, which offers trainings, and you're offering them through the Duke Integrative Medicine Center?
Yes, the master training that we do for yoga teachers who want to work safely and effectively with older adults is at Duke Integrative Medicine. That's a 50-hour, 8-day master training. We also offer shorter abridged trainings in varied locations, the Kripalu Center up in Lenox, Mass., for example.
I see, yeah. And one of the reasons, well, first of all, very warm, hearty welcome to you.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here, Eva. Thank you.
So one of the reasons we're very interested in the work you're doing with Kimberly, and one of the reasons is that I think one of the most common stereotypes we have in yoga is that yoga is for the young, the fit, and flexible. And if you don't fall into one of those categories, you can't practice yoga. And I think as yoga teachers, we know that that's not true, but that is the perception of most people in society. And you're here to tell us otherwise?
Absolutely. It really is one of the kind of ironies is that as yoga has become so popular and so mainstream, there's also so much misconception about the yoga practice and what it is. And what you expressed is so true that people think they have to look a certain way and they have to be flexible. One of the most common comments I get is, "Oh, I'm not flexible enough to do yoga." And of course, that's like saying, my house is too messy to hire a cleaning service. What we tell our students and what I truly believe is that if you can breathe, you can practice yoga. And that's certainly where the older adults and the more vulnerable populations that I tend to work with and Kimberly tends to work with comes in. And you were so kind to mention the books that I've done. The one that you didn't mention is the new one that Kimberly and I just wrote. So that is, I even have a copy of it right here. That is Relax into Yoga for Seniors. And that is really the compilation of decades-long work that we've done together at Integrative Medicine, learning how to practice and teach safely for people with the most common conditions that older adults have, things like heart disease and arthritis and osteoporosis and chronic pain. So that's what we cover in this book, and that is the topic of our classes that we offer.
Beautiful. And what in your work, what are some of the things that bring people to yoga? They're older.
Well, one of the many things I love about working with this population is that what brings people to yoga in this age group is not so much usually about appearance. Younger people may want to go to yoga because they want a yoga butt or yoga abs. Older people come to yoga because they hurt and they want to feel better. They want to be able to sleep. They want to stay living independently in their own homes. They want to be able to get down on the floor and play with their grandchildren. They want to keep driving their car. So they're much more interested in function. And so it's a very mature approach. In this culture, most people are competitive, and older adults can be competitive too. But we try to create a very safe, safe environment that allows people to be exactly where they are, and it normalizes whatever someone needs and does is fine. And that gives people permission to be wherever they are and to really learn that yoga is not just what you do, but it's how you do it. So teaching people how to go to that place where they're challenging themselves, but they're not straining, is huge. And it's particularly important with this age group because ahimsa, the first principle, nonviolence, non-harming, we don't want to harm. So it's been, as you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about it. I love working with older adults.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think most people have heard about the baby boomer revolution and that older people 65 and up are right now the fastest growing sector of the population.
That's absolutely true. It's called the silver tsunami. So the percentage of the population that's 65 and up is increasing rapidly. And within that, the subgroup of what they call the oldest old. So 65 to 85 are considered young old. 85 and up are considered the oldest old. And that group is also growing. So I have a woman who takes my class regularly who's 93. And she comes on her walker. She's honestly, she's really struggling with the losses of that can come with age. She's such a beautiful spirit. So this population is also ripe for the teachings of yoga on so many levels, on the physical level, on the emotional level, the cognitive level, the spiritual level. They're fantastic.
That's beautiful. And I think it's safe to say, as you point out also in one of your writings, is that it's really one of the largest untapped market for yoga teachers, teaching to all the beginners.
It's huge because there are many yoga teachers out there who can teach what I like to call party poses, the fancy standing on one hand, going on your side, all that stuff that, I did when I was younger. I don't do anymore. So I'm, truth be told, I'm an older adult myself. I'm 63. My practice has changed as my body has aged with much of what I've learned through offering this class. We have faculty members from Duke University Medical Center who teach at our course. So I have learned from some of the country's most prominent experts on, say, osteoporosis, what might be risky, postures that might be risky for someone with low bone density. And as a thin, white woman, those are all risk factors for osteoporosis. I've changed my practice because it's just not worth it to me to get a vertebral fracture to do some fancy pose. I can still have a very vigorous, very satisfying practice. But things change. And that is one of the things that we learn in our teaching, is that everything changes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for yoga teachers who may be interested in teaching to this market, one of the main challenges is, like, even if you have a class of 50-year-olds, you run into the problem that downward dog is an immensely challenging pose that most students over the age of 50 even will not be able to comfortably do.
Many people who walk into a yoga, their first class, and yoga's gotten so popular, and there was just so many articles about that study that just came out about yoga for back pain, and newbies are coming into yoga class, and it's really important that people recognize that not all yoga classes are alike. Teachers teachers who want to work with this population need to have special training. It's just, it's for safety's sake. It's really, really important.
Yeah. So where do you even start? Because as a teacher, people are taught, all those basic poses, downward dog, warrior pose, triangle pose, revolve triangle. and the regular vocabulary of poses and even the modifications you get from for those poses just don't suffice. So have you developed like a whole different repertoire of poses and modifications, or how do you approach this issue?
Well, we have, and that's what Kimberly and I present in the Relax into Yoga book that we've done. And what we have looked at is over the years of learning from our Western medical docs at Duke who've taught us what might be unsafe if someone has arthritis or osteoporosis, we've incorporated those basic considerations into every single pose. So some of the just sort of overarching concerns tend to come with loaded forward flexion. So that is when you bend the spine forward in a loaded position, which if you're sitting, that is a loaded position. That puts much more load on the spine than standing or lying down. So a posture that, like Paschimottanasana, we don't do. And if you go to the National Osteoporosis Foundation, you'll see, what they have some very interesting consumer education about these considerations. Sort of BLT, bending, lifting, twisting, tends to be when people have vulnerabilities of their musculoskeletal system. And this can also translate to the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system, because if you're very crunched forward, it can impact your digestion, your circulation.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and you were mentioning forward flexion, which of course, even for older people who are sitting on the floor, just a very active sitting on the floor for many people, if they have tight hamstrings or tight hips, involves a forward flexion in the lower back.
Which is why we don't teach floor sitting poses at all, Eva. That's a really good point that you make. In Relax into Yoga for Seniors and the gentle yoga classes I teach at Duke, I don't do any sitting on the floor. All sitting is done in chairs. And since people spend so much of their life sitting in chairs, it's our perspective that we are offering them a great service to teach them how to have good posture sitting in the chair. Where are your sit bones? Are you sitting on your sit bones? Where's the crown of your head? Relax your shoulders. And we invite them to come sit forward on their chair. Mm-hmm. And then we might be doing chair sitting poses for, say, 10 minutes out of an hour-long class. And people will start to cave, and we'll keep reminding them. And over time, they will build up the muscles. It really takes a lot of core strength. So sit at the end of your chair and maybe even lift up your leg. And then what happens to your back? So it's very challenging. But we do not have people sit on the floor because it's just too dangerous. It's just too risky. As you pointed out, you can put all the pillows in the world under it. And some of us, people who've been practicing yoga for years, people who live in an Asian culture where they're used to sitting on the floor, they may be able to keep a neutral spine and avoid forward flexion. But the 50-year-old walking into your class who's never done yoga before is probably going to be sitting like that.
Right, yeah. And what are some of the issues you run into in terms of motivation? Like, how do you encourage them to continue? How do you get people who, invariably will have some degree of challenge starting yoga? How do you get them to stick with the practice?
So my philosophy is if it's fun, it will get done. So number one is to make it enjoyable, to give them a sense of self-efficacy. I can do this, because it's not uncommon for people to kind of poke in and say, I don't know if I can do this, and just try. You can watch if you want at first, and you're welcome to try, but have it be enjoyable. And by the end of the class, people they feel so good. That's what will bring them back. Yeah. That's what will bring them back.
Yeah. So are you emphasizing a lot of breath work, or you have an equal distribution across, strengthening?
A relatively equal distribution. So breath work is another area that we've learned so much from our colleagues in the medical profession, in that breath work is very important, but it's simple. So we don't do extreme breath, no Kapalabhati, no Bhastrika, nothing that's forceful, because that can be problematic when people have heart disease. We don't do breath holding, so no holding at the end of the inhalation. There can be a retention at the end of exhalation. But you know what happens when people hold their breath? You know, and there are all these things we do in yoga. You inhale to 4, hold to 6, exhale, whatever. When you hold your breath, it affects your blood pressure. So in some people it goes up, in some people it goes down. Most people it goes up. But in this population, that is not an area you want to mess with.
Right,
so we don't do breath holding.
Yeah.
So we do breathing practice, but it tends to be the relaxed abdominal breath, teaching people just basic good breathing mechanics, how to breathe, you know, through the diaphragm, breathing in and out through the nose if at all possible, synchronizing the movement with breath, staying connected with their breath, breath awareness. So there's always that breath awareness, movement with the breath, but it's not a lot of fancy pranayama.
Right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Now, you teach together with Kimberly Carson.
Yes.
And what do you each bring to the table? What do you specialize in, and what does Kimberly specialize in?
Well, we have many similarities in that we're both yoga therapists. We've both been teaching in medical environments for close to 20 years. Kimberly and I met at Duke. She had been at Duke. She moved to Portland. She's at Oregon Health Sciences University right now. She moved, I'm going to say 6-8 years ago, something like that. And we've continued our partnership. So we're both yoga therapists, yoga teachers. My other hat is that I'm a journalist. My original career was as a journalist. I was at the Washington Post for 10 years. I was the founding editor of the health section. I specialized in writing about health, particularly physical activity and health. I wrote a column for many years called Bodyworks that dealt with exercise science. And so I could learn to read the literature. You know, I write, I'm a communicator. Kimberly has her master's in public health from the University of North Carolina. So she's very involved in public health with her husband, Jim. Jim was formerly a Swami for 20 years before he gave up the robes. They met when they were in grad school. He is now a PhD clinical psychologist. They've done quite a bit of research, and they created a program called Yoga of Awareness, which takes many of the yoga principles and sort of takes the any language that might be off-putting, puts it in very easy to understand language. And they have done studies on their Yoga of Awareness program with various populations, including chronic pain populations, and have had just really remarkable results. People with fibromyalgia were able to go off their medication. Right now they're working on a big study looking at the Yoga of Awareness program for people with chronic pain to get off opioids. So that'll be very interesting. So she's got a lot of research experience, and she has her master's in public health. I'm a journalist and a communicator. We're both yoga teachers, yoga therapists who've been working with people in hospitals and people with varied health conditions for almost 20 years.
Right. That's beautiful. And you are teaching a course together online on the topic that we've been talking about, not so much yoga for seniors, but teaching yoga to older beginners, which I guess is the whole range from 50 to 85. Yes. Tell us about the course and what you'll be covering.
Well, we'll be covering some of the most common conditions that a teacher is likely to find in a group of students of this age. So we'll be talking about arthritis, what it is, what it means if your student has arthritis, how to think about modifying postures safely. We'll be talking about heart disease. We'll be talking about arthritis. We'll be talking about chronic pain. So some of the very common conditions. And we'll also talk about our approach to modifying posture. So when many people take a teacher training, they're taught, well, if a person has this, then you then give them a block and do this. If a person has that, well, here's a modification. Seniors are much more complex than that, because most adults that you're going to find, the average 75-year-old has has 3 chronic conditions and takes 5 medications, or the other way around.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I don't have the statistic right in front of me. But most people in that room are going to be on prescription drugs, which have their own side effects. And they're not just going to be dealing with one thing. So that modification of putting the block there, well, suppose they have arthritis in that hand. So what we teach people, rather than this is what to do with that person, we teach people this is how to think. And we give a scaffolding. We call it the continuum of practice. So look at the posture you're teaching and figure out the intention of that pose. Why are you teaching this? Is it because you want to stretch hamstrings? Is it because it's a very empowering pose? I mean, why are you doing this? What are the risks? And then what's going on with that student in front of you, and how you might be able to come up with adaptations. It takes a lot of creativity. So we often say, you know, if you feed a person a fish, they'll eat that night. But if you teach a person to fish, they'll eat forever. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to teach people how to think about teaching this group.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So that's our intention.
Just from my own experience, I would imagine that sequencing also becomes hugely important. I find with all the beginners that, yes, they can get into a warrior 2 pose, but you have to spend about 15 minutes warming up their hamstrings and their adductors.
Yeah, and with older adults, that warm-up is particularly critical. It's important to start slowly and progress gradually, and particularly with arthritis, which you really can't scratch somebody over 40 and not find some arthritis. So if a joint has arthritis, you don't want to immediately stand and load that joint. You may want to go in and out a few times. So these are the kinds of things that we'll talk about.
That's great. Wonderful. Well, it just sounds like a great and very timely course as well, Carol. So thank you so much for joining us to tell us more about your work. And we look
Thanks
forward
for the
to
opportunity.
seeing you soon on Yoga U.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. We're most grateful to be able to offer this class.
Well, it's very timely, particularly with your new book that just came out. So I'm sure a lot of surge of interest in your work. So
thank you.
Very honored to host you.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care.